Today on the bench, I'm going to tie you up Don's Flashback. If you want an outstanding Mayfly nymph, this is the one. Make sure you have these materials ready before you tie the fly. For the hook, we're going to use a Mustad C53S size 14. We'll tie using some 8/0 olive thread, some brown pheasant tail for the body. We'll use some copper wire for the ribbing, some peacock herl for the thorax, some pheasant tail for the tail and the legs, and some anti-static bag for the flashback. To start the fly off, I've tied on my thread. I've taken about 8 to 10 strands of my pheasant tail, and I'm just going to make them about a half the length of the hook and tie them in for the tail. And make sure you always wrap behind the tail just to make sure it stands up. And cut off your excess. Take some copper ribbing and we'll tie this in, and we're going to rib up the body with this later. So make sure you bring it right back to where you tied in the tail. After we have the ribbing tied in, we're going to take some of our anti-static bag and we're going to tie this in, and this is going to actually form our whole back on the fly and thorax casing on the fly. So we'll just tie this back to the hook and leave this off for a little bit later. After we have the anti-static bag tied in, I've taken a good clump of pheasant tail. I've probably taken twice as much as I used to tie in the tail. And now I'm going to tie them in by the tips. And this is important. You want to tie them in by the tips into the body. Wrap your thread back towards the tail of the hook. And then wrap your thread back forward and leave a lot of room for the thorax. So you probably want 2/3 up the hook to leave the thread there. And now we're going to clip on to our pheasant tail and just wrap it forward to form the body. And only go up to where you left your thread off about 2/3 of the way up the hook. We're now going to take our anti-static bag that we had hanging off the back of the hook. We're going to pull it over our newly formed body that we did with the pheasant tail and just tie it off there. But don't cut the anti-static bag. What we're going to do is pull this back and just leave that there. And now take your copper wire and take about 3 to 4 wraps over your anti-static bag and rib the body. Once the body's tied in and we have the anti-static bag pulled over to form the body, I'm going to take about 2 to 3 strands of our peacock herl and we're going to tie this in for the thorax. So tie it in where we left off on the body and take about 2 to 3 turns to form the thorax up towards the eyelet of the hook. Once the thorax is tied in, there's lots of different things you can use to tie in the legs. There's a lot of small, softer hackles. Any kind of soft hackle works well, but I like to actually use the pheasant tail. So all I do is trim off about 4 of the pheasant tail tips, and I'll just make them about half the length of the body and just tie it in right at the eyelet, right in front of my fly. So I'll put a few legs out one side of the fly, and then I'll move to the other side of the hook and put about 3 or 4 legs out that side. To finish the fly off, we have our legs tied off on both sides, and we still have our anti-static bag left on the top. Now we're just going to pull this over to form the thorax casing right to the eyelet of the hook and tie off there, right at the eyelet. And make sure your 2 sets of wings are on both sides of this, so they splay out to the side. To finish the fly off, we're going to take our whip finisher and whip finish off the head. And since I'm using the green thread, I like to put a nice little green head on this fly. There's another good material also is red thread if you want a redder finish on the fly, but I prefer the green thread. It seems to finish it off nicely. So there it is, Don's Flashback. This pattern works very well under an indicator and also on a clear intermediate sink line when there's mayflies coming off. To watch all our latest Sport Fishing on the Fly episodes and to order Sport Fishing on the Fly merchandise, head to www.sfotf.ca. And if you would like to book an adventure like this one shown, head to ontheflyadventures.ca and book yourself the trip of a lifetime.